basic and senior secondary education, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, Building Research Partners to Develop Evidence-Based Education Policy. My name is Juliet, and I'm the policy analyst within the delivery team here at the ministry. In 2018, the government of Sierra Leone embarked on an ambitious goal to deliver free quality education as an initiative that aims to provide greater access, quality, and equity in education for over 2 million children by removing financial barriers to school enrollment and improving teaching and learning outcomes. During the launch of free quality education, the President, His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, called all relevant stakeholders to ensure the success of free quality school education. 2 years later, FQSE, as it's commonly known, remains a flagship program of the government and a cornerstone of Sierra Leone's human capital development. Today, on this 18th day of February, we launched the MBSSE inaugural policy ebook titled Transforming Education Service Delivery Through Evidence-Informed Policy and Practice. Despite the challenges we have faced as a ministry, we have taken tremendous strides to ensure that research, collaboration, and partnership is at the center of delivering free quality education for all children in Sierra Leone. This ebook reflects MBSSE's commitment to evidence-informed decision-making. MBSSE partnered with the Education Partnerships Group, EPG, to coordinate the development of this book. EPG provided technical support and management and quality assurance, working directly with the MBSSE's delivery team. For its inaugural policy ebook, the MBSSE commissioned 6 research partners with research studies spanning different themes and levels of education system. While some reports have been officially launched, others have yet to be broadly disseminated. To inform the selection of featured research pieces, the MBSSE senior management team developed these criteria for research piece for the ebook. First, we wanted to make sure that the research piece was original and an original piece and a data analyst. Then we also wanted to ensure that this research is conducted in Sierra Leone and for the context of Sierra Leone. Thirdly, we wanted to ensure that this research was published within the last 2 years. And also we wanted this research to inform policy practice within MBSSE. For the purposes of this webinar, we have asked the partners to outline their presentation on these bases, on how the research has informed policy and practice in Sierra Leone to date, and to highlight any results or indication of impact if it hasn't yet. Secondly, we wanted them to talk about some key lessons learned or challenges that they have faced during the development of the research piece, as well as the approach that they use. Later on, the partners will get an opportunity to elaborate on their key findings and what it took to achieve government buy-in and increase the likelihood that the research is actually used to inform policy. As participants, you will get an opportunity at the end to ask questions in the chat, in which we'll try to get to, but in the essence of time, we'll share these questions to the individual organizations for follow-up. Once again, thank you for joining us and welcome. And now I would like to introduce the Honorable Minister, David Sengeh.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar, and thank you, Juliet, for the overview that you just gave. I might speak on behalf of the leadership of the ministry that when we talk about policy these days, it has to be evidence-based, it has to be data-driven, and it has to be consultative. Research is critical and core to what we want to do within the ministry. And these partnerships exist not just locally, but internationally. They exist across government, and they also exist across local NGOs and international partners. All of these different efforts are essential for us because we know that if we want to transform education service delivery, it has to be informed by what is working and what is not working, and how we can use what is and what isn't to inform the decisions that we make as leaders and as policymakers. And we are really looking to see how we can better partner between MBSSE and implementing agencies and researchers and academics to be able to inform what we learn and to inform how we embed in policy and the programs that we do. It's not a linear option. It's very clear for us. It's a cycle. And that cycle starts from the kinds of research questions we're asking, linked to our education sector plan, linked to the programs that we have, links to the ideas that we're about to test, how we then roll those out, and how we roll those out, the partners we use to roll them out with, the communities in which we work, and the data that we collect. And for us, this is why even with COVID, we still conducted the annual school census 2020. It was important for us that we don't miss any year. And MBSSE has since prior 2015 been collecting annual school census data, and we went from paper-based to slowly digitizing it. And by 2018, 2019, we had a fully digital annual school census process. And that annual school census process was driven by ensuring that all the data and all the work that we have are fully transformed. And it's important for us to know that the data that we have and the way that we engage with these data are used to inform processes that we have. Next slide. And for us, it is really based on these 4 particular pillars. One is involving the MBSSE in the research questions at the inception of the project, right? So we have a plan, and we have an annual work plan. And as I was mentioning, we have an education sector plan. The current sector plan is an extension. And in 2021 to 2026, we'll have a 5-year sector plan. So that plan, the work that we do, the research has to be aligned with our priorities. Secondly, holding regular updates with the ministry. And this is because while we didn't have a curriculum and research unit before, now we have curriculum and research units that exist, that we now have that exists. And that unit is led by a director, managed by CEO, and we have research officers that we've also hired. So we need to be able to be regularly engaging. The third thing is that we really have to have this process happen at all levels, across MDAs, at the local level, at the international level, at the national level, within the different units. And finally, we have to, as we mentioned, data remains critical to improving learning outcomes. All of this work is to improve learning outcomes. And if you're doing work that is not improving learning outcomes, teaching conditions, that's not focused on our equity and radical inclusion, then it's then we may not prioritize it as much. So I would like to end the short, brief remarks to say we really are excited. We invite partnership, particularly for research and data, and we will implement many of these recommendations. And as you'll see from this process, some of the findings here have already been implemented and have already been rolled out. So thank you very much. And I look forward to learning as much as I could. And I hope you all enjoy this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'd now like to call on the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Yatta Kanu, to talk about the importance of research in MBSSE policy development process. One moment, please. So we will have the CEO address us later. We'll now start going into some of the research that have been conducted. So we'll ask for the first presenter. This first presenter provides continued technical support to the ministry and establishment, coordination, and quality assurance mechanism of the ministry's operation, planning, and policy pillar. In 2019, the MBSSE commissioned the Education Partnerships Group to conduct a system-level analysis of education service delivery in Sierra Leone. The report identifies disconnects between basic education policy design and delivery at the central and district levels through an organizational mapping of the MBSSE and a process mapping of school monitoring, school subsidy, and education budgeting, disbursement, and expenditure. Please welcome EPG.
Thank you, Juliet. Good morning, everyone. I am Abdullahi Conte, and I am the Program Manager for Education Partnership Groups in Sierra Leone. For a brief context, Education Partnership Group is a non-profit consultancy that supports governments in low and middle-income countries to shape and strengthen their education systems. On that note, I want to express my thanks for the opportunity to partner and support the MBSSE with this inaugural policy book and its ongoing efforts to strengthen education policy. As Juliet noted, the MBSSE in 2019 commissioned EPG to conduct a study, a system-level analysis of education service delivery in Sierra Leone, with an objective of mapping the education system in Sierra Leone to identify inefficiencies and possible ways to address them. It was more geared towards a system strengthening approach. Next slide. So the system level analysis, it influenced the MBSSE policy and practices in major areas, but will concentrate on three core areas. Just for a little bit of background, also the reports will be shared and we'll be able to discuss a little bit about how the process was conducted. But just for the presentation, we are focusing on how the study influenced the ongoing policy development work, as the minister noted. So this will highlight the key findings from the study, what were the key recommendations extrapolated from the finding and the possible impact that the reports or the studies having as far as policy is concerned in the ministry. So the first finding that came out is it shows that there is no unifying legislative act or policy guideline guiding centralized and decentralized education services. It's worthy to know that basic education in Sierra Leone is devolved, which means the study find out that most of the legislative framework and policies were not harmonized. Some were a bit obsolete and they were not speaking in tandem with regards. And some of the changes that have taken place in contemporary time, the policies were unable to capture these changes because of the time lapse. So the key recommendation that came out from that finding was to strengthen the policy development landscape. That's to draft written policies, which will be accompanied by operational guidelines, monitoring framework, and of course, a compliance redress mechanism. It's not just about to draft the policy, but ensures that the policies are fully implemented. The impact this approach is having now, it has led to the establishment of the MBSSE's Operation Policy and Planning pillar, which is now mandated to lead the policy development process in the ministry. And some of the policies that have gone through this process or are going through the process include the radical inclusion policy, the use of school subsidy guideline, and some other policies like the school feeding, the early childhood development, which the CEO will have talked much about. And we'd also like to credit the FCDOs for supporting the ongoing work in the Operation Policy and Planning pillar. Next. Another finding that came out from the study was there was outdated organograms and job description. This is as a result in 2018, the ministry were divided into two reporting lines and a whole lot of other issues. The organogram was a bit obsolete, so there was a need to kind of like strengthen to reflect the reporting lines on who does what and so the key recommendation that came out was to do a total review of the structure, the roles and responsibility, both at central and district level. So that was also key. What has happened from that recommendation is there has been a massive restructuring of the MBSSE, where the minister himself is facilitating, which included the recruitment of new staff, the establishment of the delivery team to expedite service delivery, and other units that have developed. So that restructuring, bringing in human capacity for human capital development within the ministry and supporting all of that came as a result of this. Next. And the final key area that we concentrated on, as Juliet was talking around the process mapping that we did, is we realized that there is a lack of clarity on the roles and responsibility and the processes for key elements in education service delivery, like monitoring, subsidies, budgeting, which really impede service delivery. So the key recommendation that came from that was that there needs to be a massive review of each process and how we develop a systematic way of doing monitoring. And there was also an emphasis on the quality of data, as the minister was talking around how data will inform all of this. The impact it's already having is some of this finding is currently being used, or it was used in the development of the education sector analysis, which is the forerunner for the the development of the new education sector plan 2021 to 2026, which really shows government vision on education delivery for the next 5 years. Next slide. So as Juliet was also saying, the essence of this discussion was to also map out what partnership looks like and what are some of the successes. So I'll just highlight some of the key successes that came out from our partnership with the MBSSE. So the first thing that happened while we were doing the study was that the MBSSE was involved from the inception stage. That is, like, we co-designed the objective and scope of the methodology. EPG didn't do it in isolation. The MBSSE was involved, and also while the study was going on, we were providing regular updates to the MBSSE to validate emerging findings and some of the challenges in the field. There was ongoing discussion. And lastly, like, we were able to monitor and stay up to date with the evolving political landscape. That was when the study was done. There was a change from Minister Timbo to Minister Sengeh, and so the report was expedited to help to enhance Minister Sengeh restructuring drive and his analysis of the education delivery, the systems and processes in education delivery at basic level. So on that note, in summary, this was what APG did and some of the things that came out that are impacting education delivery in Sierra Leone. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the question and answer session that I will be able to talk more into this. Over to you, Juliet.
Thank you, Abdullah. Our next presenter's research focuses on empowering educationally marginalized girls and closing the gaps of the high rates of out-of-school adolescent girls across the country through the Every Adolescent Girl Empowered and Resilient program. EAGER undertakes research to understand the contextual background of this issue and the social and economic factors influencing exclusion, dropout, and return to formal schooling. Please help me welcome International Rescue Committee.
Thank you, Juliet, and good morning, everyone. So just to give a little bit of background about EAGER, of course, whilst the cost of schooling has been a persistent barrier to education in the past, the government of Sierra Leone has really striven to counter this with the introduction of the free quality school education in 2018. However, despite this, many adolescent girls remain out of school. So the EAGER program is operating in this context to empower girls who have missed out on education through alternative learning and empowerment opportunities, as for many girls, return to school, to formal schooling is still not a viable option. So the baseline research that EAGER has conducted explored the contextual background and the learning needs of the program participants, aiming at building a profile of out-of-school adolescent girls in Sierra Leone understanding the facilitators and the barriers to girls' education, employment, and empowerment, and also explore girls' motivation to participate and interest in educational programs. So the baseline data have also been supplemented by findings from one-to-one meetings held with the girls and also surveys that were conducted during COVID-19. And the findings were used to inform the program design and implementation, but also providing recommendations for evidence-based policy and practice reform by highlighting the specific needs of out-of-school adolescent girls in Sierra Leone. In terms of practice, while the impact of the project is still being assessed, Eager has leveraged research findings and project resources to draw attention of national stakeholders to learner practices on functional real-world literacy and numeracy, as well as on stress management, resilience, and managing emotions. These issues have been incorporated in our teaching and learning model to address gaps in social and emotional learning. Our mentors have also been coached on how to provide psychological first aid to girls who need direct support. And BBC Media Action, our partner in the Eager Consortium, along with Concern Worldwide and Restless Development, recorded and shared practices via social media platforms to help fight the additional anxiety experienced by many, including and especially girls, during COVID-19. At community level, Eager also created opportunities for community stakeholders to learn and act in support of adolescent girls in the form of community dialogues that have been informed by the voices and recommendations of the girls, whilst mothers groups have been created to also support with childcare responsibilities and enable girls to attend the learning sessions. As for policy, the project research and adoptions also contributed to the Ministry Emergency Education Task Force's communication and social mobilization pillar, as well as the psychosocial support pillar, which are part of the Ministry COVID-19 response structure. The IRC, with our partners, participated in consultations and shared resources developed by the program to address protection risks that hamper out-of-school adolescent girls' access to learning. As an example, a selection of the GBV prevention messages and psychological first aid materials that Eager has designed were incorporated into government psychosocial support manual, as well as the message guide on GBV, teenage pregnancy, and child protection during COVID-19. IRC, as well as our partners, have also been actively participating in the review of the national strategy for response to SGPV by leveraging learning, among others, from Eager as well. Going to the next slide. The baseline research really enabled the program to acquire a deep understanding of girls' needs and views and amplify girls' voices to inform our response plan, as well as inform the government response plan. In addition, the research incorporates thousands of girls' voices by utilizing a large sample size drawn from the Western area and Eastern, Northern, and Southern provinces, so that it is really diverse. Literacy and numeracy assessments were adapted to measure functional real-world competencies using informal pathways, so that this could provide a more accurate and relevant representation of skills and knowledge than standard learning assessments. And finally, the inclusion of social and emotional learning assessments and programming will provide insights into the impact of these skills on educational attainment and transition beyond the Eager program. Evidence generated by Eager through our research can provide very important data about the reality of marginalization of out-of-school adolescent girls in Sierra Leone and best practices to promote empowerment and inclusion in society. This would offer valuable inputs for the implementation of the government and the Ministry Radical Inclusion Policy, and the project response to these findings can provide evidence of what works effectively to support this population. It can, of course, feed in improvement plans and any future review of the policy. So just to conclude, whilst the government of Sierra Leone made significant strides in making education accessible to young people, equitable access to learning for out-of-school adolescent girls remain an area where further actions are needed. And this research will provide, hopefully, evidence about the effectiveness of integrated interventions that can equip the girls with core knowledge base, increase their confidence, and their ability to take greater control in their life, overall empowering girls in the long term. Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you, Julia, for that presentation. This next presenter explored a multilateral partnership with the MBSSE and the Directorate of Science, Technology, and Innovation to develop the Education Data Hub, which aims to improve education by making high-quality data available for evidence-based decision-making, program planning, and spending decision. Since then, the portal has helped resolve the challenge of finding official education data from governments. Please help me welcome Edtech Hub.
Thanks for the introduction, Juliet, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this morning. My name is Chris McBurney, and I currently lead Edtech Hub's engagement in Sierra Leone. For those who are unfamiliar with our work, Edtech Hub is an FCDO, World Bank, and Gates-funded research partnership that aims to increase the use of evidence in decisions about technology and education. And two important aspects of our work involve researching different EdTech interventions and providing technical assistance to government partners around the world, including the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education and the Directorate of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Sierra Leone. So I'm really excited to present the findings from our user research report on Sierra Leone's Education Data Hub this morning, as the analysis really sits at the confluence of these two different areas. And today I'll give an overview of the study, and then I'll look at how our findings have started to impact decision-making in Sierra Leone. Next slide, please. Now, the Education Data Hub emerged from a partnership between the MBSSE and DSTI in 2019. And the Hub presents analysis from national exams and the annual school census to support data-driven decisions and to allow the public to hold decision makers to account for the education of children in Sierra Leone. And for those who haven't seen it, and I definitely recommend that you check it out, all of this analysis is freely available to the public in a series of very nice visuals and maps. However, at the same time, the presentation of data alone, regardless of the quality of the data or the attractiveness of the maps and the visuals, it doesn't mean that decision makers or the public will use or even look at the information in practice. So at a very basic level, as an example, the Hub would be unlikely to achieve its aims if users simply didn't know that the system existed. So realizing this, when the MBSSE and DSTI looked to upgrade the Data Hub last year, they invited Edtech Hub to research how different users engage with the system. And the idea being that the findings would ultimately inform the next iteration of program delivery and the next investment in the Data Hub. So when approaching this research, we conducted a series of semi-structured deep dive interviews with 19 individuals from government, civil society, academia, NGOs. And similar to the other presenters, we co-designed the study with DSTI and the MBSC. So we worked together to identify the scope, identify the research questions or sample, and providing regular updates on the progress of the study. And it's probably worth mentioning that given the pandemic, the interviews were done entirely remotely, so over Zoom and WhatsApp. Now moving on to the next slide, we'll consider kind of what we learned from these interviews. Well, firstly, our research suggested that the Education Data Hub has a relatively limited user base at this point. So 7 out of the 19 interviewees had either not heard of the Data Hub or had not used the portal. And those who knew about the Data Hub and had not used it gave reasons such as an inability to download raw data, an inability to use the portal on a mobile phone, so they felt they had to use some form of computer, and a lack of timely information. So at the time of the study, the most recent data came from the 2018 annual school census. And now coming to the central theme of the webinar, so research partnership for evidence-based decision-making. Based on these findings and this evidence, we developed a series of practical recommendations for the MBSSE and DSTI to act on in both the short term as well as the long term. So some of the immediate recommendations included things such as the addition of data from the 2019 annual school census, the production of a glossary with key definitions, and the development of the functionality to download raw data. And then just as an example of a long-term recommendation, it would be something like determining clear metrics for success, and this would be effectively a guide for the development of the overall portal. So after 3 months, we followed up with the STI and the MBSC to kind of figure out if and how these recommendations had impacted policy and programming. And we are really quite happy to see that the Education Data Hub team at DSTI had already started to make changes that aligned with these recommendations. So at the moment, I know the team are working hard to digitize the data from the 2019 annual school census, and they have the intention of adding data from the 2020 census once results are out. And then separately, the delivery team at the MBSSE has developed a data dictionary to help decision makers and the public to understand commonly used terms and concepts. And at this point, you may be asking, why am I excited about these changes? What's the relevance? What's the so what? So for me, these immediate improvements have real potential to lead to positive change for children in Sierra Leone. So as an example, I'm going to focus on the addition of data from the most recent annual school census. So with this up-to-date information, ministry level officials, NGOs, education providers, they can develop interventions that meet the current needs of learners and teachers. So if I wanted to, I could use the Data Hub to identify low-performing districts, or I could find schools without access to basic provisions, whether that could be electricity, toilets, books, furniture. So really, in other words, I could develop an intervention that would meet real rather than assumed need. And ultimately, for me, is this, that can empower decision makers and the public to ensure that we, as education stakeholders, can better meet the needs of the most marginalized and ultimately promote radical inclusion in Sierra Leone. Thanks, Juliet. Back to you.
Thank you, Chris. This next presenter is a government entity that was commissioned by the MBSSE to conduct a management and functional review to structurally realign and enhance the MBSSE's institutional and staff capacities. The review team was able to examine the challenges and service delivery function to enhance its overall performance potentials. The team also determined the appropriateness of the current operating structure with critical attention to the organizational ethos and that are fundamental to delivering on priorities of the government of Sierra Leone with respect to the effective delivery of basic and senior secondary school education. Please welcome the Public Reform Sector Unit.
10 days and MBSSE in PSRU to this. So I would like to limit my intervention to just three key areas. One is to just give you a synopsis of the MFR process. Then I would like to discuss how the MFR informs policy, and I would like to share some key lessons that we learned. So PSRU is the government agency that is tasked with spearheading all public sector reform and modernization efforts. And this we do so that the public sector will be delivering services efficiently and in a timely manner. And the impetus for this particular MFR was triggered by the fact that MBSSE was demerged. So when that demerging process took place, they were trying to reposition themselves to be able to absorb the chain management and other related shocks. And they also wanted to recalibrate their processes so that their interventions would be impactful. So we went in to do this diagnostic test, which started with an inception meeting, and we discussed the methodology and everything that will be involved in the process. So after that was done, we tried to really zoom in on how this MFR process will inform policy and make sure that the ministry continues to deliver effectively. And some of the key findings were that the division of MEST into MBSSE and MTHE created some confusion over the separation of policy responsibilities. So the outcome was that as a result of the MFR process and as a result of the process diagnosing this problem, the key policy change was that the MBSSE was able to restructure itself and ensure that its organogram was modified to deal with some of these change management issues. So the MBSSE did some restructuring and modified its organogram. Then also, we were able to find out that reporting lines were not always clearly observed, and operational terms were not clearly spelled out. So role confusion and role delineation issues were present. And as a result of the MFR process, it informed the policy that high-level commitment to realign directorates and develop a new organizational chart. Then also, to date, the non-operational directorate for research and curriculum development has been revived. So as a result of the MFR process, the ministry prioritized the revival of the Directorate of Research and Curriculum Development. So also the MFR process diagnosed the fact that there was a lack of effective structures, ineffective operational systems, and lack of internal consultative processes and procedures. And how the MFR process informed policy in this area is that there have been now key changes to the management and operational functions of MBSSE to support in the delivery of the free quality education process. So it goes without saying that the MBSSE is now being more consultative, more partnership oriented as they do their work. So I would now like to take you to some of the key lessons that we learned. The first is that it was key that regional field visits were incorporated into the exercise, which allowed the team to validate claims that were made at the headquarter level and reduced reliance on triangulations. Then also, another key lesson that was learned was that the MFR process, once it extends to the regional offices, gives the opportunity for the researchers to make recommendations that were really invasive and that reflected both regional and headquarter perspectives, rather than just being reliant on what was said at the headquarter level. Then also the unintended consequence of the MFR process was that it helped to establish critical data sets that were otherwise not present. So if there were data gaps that were critical for the ministry to plug in certain gaps, then those will be derived, though they were not the primary goal behind the field visits. Then also we realized that another lesson that was learned was that for the MFR process to optimize its catalytic effect, the recommendations have to be tracked. So the MFR process, it's not an end in itself, but it's just a means to an end, which is why we keep talking about its catalytic effect, is because it is just something that will give the ministry a jolt to produce at optimal level. So if you just do the MFR process and not track it, then there will be a problem. So you have to continually be tracking progress to make sure the implementations are the recommendations are implemented. And when there are variances between recommendations made and recommendations implemented, then we will be checking in with the ministry to make sure that we implement at 100%. Then also, another lesson learned was that the MBSSE is not immune to the challenges and complexities of change management processes, and that as much as they would have tried to absorb the shock of the demerger, they still had to endure some of those change management issues that were flagged during the MFR process. Then finally, we learned the lesson that it was best when decisions around reforms and policy frameworks are informed by institutional assessments and data. So this is like a radical departure from the way business was done to a new dawn, which dictates that policies and system changes or restructuring should not be done arbitrarily, but should be informed by data and should be informed by institutional diagnosis that come up with recommendations that give the senior management people the blueprint or the impetus for doing the changes that they will. So I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Raymond. This next presenter's research is still ongoing, and it explores a holistic approach to education using a socio-ecological model to engage children, families, schools, and communities in addressing safety, well-being, and learning through the SAFE Learning Model. The SAFE Learning Model applies rigorous research to develop a strong evidence base around the hypothesis that children's educational progress is enhanced when they live in communities that support gender equality and children's well-being. Please help me welcome Concern.
Thank you, Juliet. I am Alamayo from Concern Worldwide. I will be presenting 3 slides. First one is background, the second one is research, and the third will be what worked well. To start with the background, safe learning model is a research-based intervention. It aims to realize sustainable improvement in children's literacy skill, well-being, and improving gender equality in school as well as community. And it uses transformative gender approach to strengthen inclusive pedagogy and practice. Safe learning model is an integrated project with livelihood and health intervention to promote regular children's attendance and children's learning. This project is implemented in partnership with Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education in 10 chiefdoms of Tonkololi district. Tonkololi district focusing 100 schools, and it has 3 core components in this intervention. First is literacy intervention. We have a school level, school-related gender-based intervention, and we have also community level, school-related gender-based intervention. Next slide. The research component is undertaken by University College Dublin, University College Dublin, and it has 2 components, quantitative as well as qualitative. The quantitative one is a longitudinal randomized controlled trial, and the qualitative one is a transgenerational qualitative study from children up to their grandparents. This research is aimed at generating evidences on the impact of systematically addressing school-related gender-based violence through transformative gender approach to improve learning outcome and child well-being, with the intention of informing education policy and strategy of Sierra Leone. We have conducted a pilot study to pilot the model and to check the research instrument. With this pilot study, we have found out that the research instrument is age appropriate and culture specific. In 2019-20, we have also conducted intermediate study, and this intermediate study has given us initial finding, and this initial finding suggests addressing inequality in access and inclusion alongside with ensuring safe learning environment will result in better learning outcomes. The research has a final research to be conducted in 2021 with the report due in 2022. And this research is expected to provide specific evidence on informing education policies and strategies in Sierra Leone, particularly on comprehensive school safety, child protection and well-being, gender inclusion, school-related gender-based violence, and pre- and in-service teacher training curricula. Next slide. What worked well? We've learned from this research that mixed methodology provides robust evidence to effective intervention and rich analysis of contextual as well as cultural influences to intervention. We've also learned ethical and safeguarding protocols helps in developing research instruments that are age appropriate and culture specific. And we've also shared initial evidence in transformative, in transparent, clear and transparent manners through national learning event and collected feedback from partners. On the challenge part, we've also encountered a challenge because of COVID, and this COVID has interrupted our midway data collection, and it has also triggered us to adapt our intervention to respond to COVID. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Amir, for that. Findings from our final presentation plays a pivotal role in informing the MBSSE district and schools on the quality of teaching and learning in Sierra Leone. In 2017, the MBSSE, then called MEST, started the secondary grade learning assessment to annually report on skills and learning levels of secondary grade pupils in Sierra Leone. Over the last 4 years, supported and funded by the FCDO, Lewi Lan Program, Sgla, has given education stakeholders an annual health check of Sierra Leone secondary education system tracking changes in the state of pupil learning achievement, teaching practices, and school learning environments. Please welcome Lewi Lan.
Thank you, Juliet. And good morning, everyone. The piece that we've written in the ebook is called Using Assessment Data to Address Foundational Skills Gap in Literacy and Numeracy in Secondary Grades in Sierra Leone. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is an FCDO funded research through a program called Lewi Lan, which is implemented by Mott MacDonald and Oxford Policy Management. And my name is Sauravi. And while I'm presenting today, this is the collective work of many of my colleagues, both in Sierra Leone and outside. On the next slide, as Juliet mentioned, this what we call secondary grade learning assessment, or SGLA in short, is like an annual health check of the secondary education system. And it looks at not just learning outcomes of pupils, but also teaching practices within the classroom, various other aspects related to teachers and teacher workforce management, school leadership and management, as well as the holistic teaching and learning environment. And we've done this since we started in 2016. And so we have 4 rounds of data, and these rounds of data have covered some very crucial moments in the evolution of the secondary education system in Sierra Leone, such as the post-Ebola recovery period, launch of FQSE, and now COVID. And I just wanted to highlight a few areas where the findings of our SGLAs have had some impact. The first is to just flag and remember that we are not trying to displace or substitute the exam data that comes out of MBSC and VASC. That has its own importance in the system in terms of students' progression, but this is really complementing that exam data to give us a deeper understanding of what competencies, skills, and ability to apply those skills pupils have in their world that is outside of the school, and what they'll experience in the job market and world outside. At the national level, the SGLAs have enabled the ministry to monitor district performance in a decentralized service delivery setup. In particular, that kind of monitoring of district performance often is assumed to be about pointing blame or blame shifting, but that we have actually also found some incredible pockets of good performance, what we call positive deviance in districts, and we have done qualitative deep dive studies to understand what is driving those pockets of positive deviance and what other parts of the system can learn from them. At the district level, the SGLAs have been used to develop individual district level action plans and performance monitoring plans based on the SGLA data. And then at the classroom level, this data has provided a granular understanding to teachers and principals on what foundational skills pupils are lacking, and thereby using those insights for developing remediation tools for pupils. And just at a more holistic system strengthening level, we have worked very closely right from the beginning to ensure that there is sort of long-lasting national and rejoicing to see this coming to fruition through the newly established assessment, curriculum, and research unit. On the next slide, I just wanted to highlight what we have learned in terms of lessons. I think if there was one sentence in which I can summarize the lesson, it would be what I have at the top of the slide, that constantly weighing the child will not make it grow. It is not just the act of measurement, but actually acting on that measurement and the evidence that drives change. So any self-improving education system will do the assessments and the research, but then it will also analyze and diagnose what exactly that information or data is telling us, derive insights from it, and then use it to develop policies and remediate. And that cycle has to continue. There's also something we've reflected on in terms of government partnership and ownership. So of course, as I said, this is a donor-funded program, and it cannot permanently sustain an assessment system. So we have to think of ways to integrate these assessments and all these initiatives into the national education policy and budgeting cycles of the ministry itself. There is obviously a lot of discussion about innovation, but I think we often forget that while innovation is important, it's also very important to ensure that we do the sort of small routine things really, really well, because that is where the foundation of any good evidence and then using it for policy really comes from. So, the principal who in a determined way uses the tablet that has been given to her to collect data every day on assessments and attendance and so on is as important as the software or the hardware that is in her hands. And I think we often forget that it's small behavioral shifts that are really very important, as is the big sort of shiny stuff. and to also have an overarching assessment strategy and governance structure to ensure that all of these sort of projectized donor-funded research pieces then come together in the form of something that has an overarching strategy and governance structure holding it. And finally, this is an important piece of work, but we are under no illusion that it has to be integrated with MIS, with the exam data, with other regular monitoring data, to really be of value such that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and we can then derive much better linkages and insights from what that entire body of work is telling us, rather than some of these disparate pieces. Thank you very much. All our data and reports are on the MBSSE website, and I'd be very happy to address questions. Thank you, Juliet. Back to you.
Thank you, Suruvi. And now that you've heard all the research and from all our partners, I'd like to call on the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Yatta Kanu, to talk about the importance of research in the MBSSE policy development process.
Thank you very much, Juliet. It's been my pleasure to listen to all the presentations, especially so because I have read each of the pieces that have has been published in our ebook. And I want to thank all of the researchers who have graciously allowed us to include their work in our ebook, and also to make the time to be here this morning to present their work. We value the partnership we have with you. Your contribution in the form of research is important because it ensures that our government decision-making is informed by timely, actionable, and research that is locally relevant. Since the introduction of the Free Quality School Education Program, the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education has embraced an evidence-based decision-making process, both for the development of our policies and for their implementation. Policy development, much like research, is a sequential process that starts by defining the contours of a problem. And then we go to work to help us widen our understanding of the problem, and then be enabled to craft effective strategies with most feasible solutions. We cannot do this without your research, because your research is what helps us gather the information that we need to drive our decisions. Together with a clear rationale that builds on a robust analysis of the existing policy landscape, we are able to strengthen education service delivery and improve teaching and learning outcomes for all in Sierra Leone and sometimes beyond. We know that policy development differs across countries, across sectors, even across ministries and departments. However, we also believe that policy design must be supported by a well-defined process and key principles of good practice. Therefore, we at MBSSE have developed or created what was previously referred to as the Operations, Planning, and Policy Pillar, the OPP in short. The OPP is the structure of our policy development processes and for ensuring that good practices are followed. The pillar already has very well put together executive structures. There is the executive committee, we have the secretariat, and then we have the working groups that draft our policies. Now, each of these structures plays a unique role, beginning with deciding what policies need to be developed, to forwarding the policy into the government system for review. The OPP pillar ensures an orderly and predictable policy process. Now, to further enhance our commitment to evidence-informed policy processes, we have just introduced a research application form that all researchers are required to complete and submit to the ministry. The information you provide on the research application form will help me as the technical head of the ministry to determine the pertinence of your research study and its alignment to the vision and mission of the ministry. It also helps me see that good research protocols are followed. We therefore kindly ask that this form be completed and submitted for review prior to starting your research. Once again, I thank you all, and we look forward to our continued partnership in delivering free quality school education for.
Thank you, CEO. And now we're going to go into the preliminary conversations with the researchers. So at this point, we'll enable the chat so you can chat in the. Yes, thank you, CEO. We're now going to some questions where the researchers and the presenters will get an opportunity to elaborate on some of their research, and we'll also give you an opportunity now to chat your questions into the chat box as we go through this session. So the first question is specific to EPG and PSRU. Both of your research and work with the MBSSE involved system level analysis and MBSSE's organizational structure. How has your research influenced decision-making and policy to date?
That's hello, so I can go on behalf of EPG and PSRU. You can go after me if that works. Is that okay, Juliet?
Yes, that is fine, Abdullah.
All right, thank you very much. So this is just to re-emphasize one of the slides that I already presented that really captures what the key findings are, the key recommendations that came from the finding and how it has really impacted the policy development landscape. And principally among these is the establishment of the Ministry's operations and policy pillar with the CEO has just talked about, which really creates a consistent and coherent way of policy development, because the key finding that came from it is around how we do have a unifying, the need to have a unifying legislative act and to really strengthen the policy development landscape. So looking from that inefficiency, I think the major impact is having now is the development of a structure that is really there to ensure there is due process, to ensure there are best practices to enhance effective delivery of education policies. So that's one key area that's that when we talk about our structure, our research has really impacted the MBSSEs. So again, one we may always talk about is the restructuring, because as I said earlier on, some of the inefficiency around reporting lines and all, there is still an ongoing process. Understanding who does what, because system strengthening is more around efficient service delivery. So that is one thing also that we are still moving forward to. So I can hand over to my colleague, and then I will also be able to take specific comments. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, am I on?
Yes, you are, Raymond.
Okay. Yes. So from the PSRU side, the critical way that the MFR process helped inform policy at MBSSE is that we recommended that certain directorates, especially the Directorate for Research and Curriculum Development, was established, and MBSSE incorporated that, and that directorate has been established, and leading processes that have culminated in the development of well customized and cutting edge curriculum, and has made the ministry's work on policy interventions being driven by data and research. So I think that's a very key policy influence. I think another would be that the emphasis that was placed on monitoring and evaluation has translated in the ministry having more robust M&E mechanisms to monitor and ensure quality assurance for the free quality school education program. So unless I'm given more time, I think I would like to just highlight those two as the most critical ones.
Thank you, Raymond and Abdullahi, for answering those. So we're getting some questions in the chat, and we'll try to manage it as soon as we're done with these set of questions. The next question is for Edtech Hub and Lewilan. Your research emphasizes on the importance of data to improve education for evidence-based decision-making and program planning. What approach did you use to engage the ministry, or what did the research team do to increase the likelihood of government buy-in?
Thanks, Juliet. And this is a really important topic and question. And I'll briefly highlight 3 planks of our approach, or the approach that we took to engaging government. So firstly, I think it's worth noting that our research on the Education Data Hub was fundamentally demand-driven. So as I mentioned earlier, the MBSC and DSTI wanted to understand how to improve the experience of users engaging with the Data Hub before upgrading the system. And I think by responding to this core need and keeping this core need at the very center of our research, it helped ensure that the study was genuinely relevant and actionable. Secondly, as well as being demand-driven, the study was co-designed and co-created in conjunction with the MBSSE and DSTI. And I think this was crucial for ensuring that the research design and the outcomes, or the final recommendations, were actually useful and usable. And finally, while important, we wanted to go beyond just sharing progress updates and findings. So as I mentioned, we've kind of physically checked in with the Education Data Hub team at DSTI since sharing our recommendations to see kind of what progress has been made. And we're now working really closely with the delivery team at MBSC, and particularly the team's data analyst, Mbsc, to support the government's broader data strategies. There's been, these are the kind of core planks of our approach to government engagement. Over to you, Suruvi.
Thanks, Chris. I think in terms of approaches to work closely with the ministry, a couple of things. When any learning assessment is being started in the country, it's very tempting to take assessments that are off the shelf. So, you know, we could have taken the PISA assessment or a number of other assessments that are conducted around the world. But I think one of the key things that we invested in was that the assessment needs to speak to the multifaceted context of the Sierra Leonean education system and the reality that students see in their world, both within school and outside of school. And that meant that while we brought some expertise from the world of assessment, we ultimately ensured that our stakeholders at the ministry level, but actually at the district level, teachers, principals, curriculum specialists from Sierra Leone were at the driving seat in ensuring that the assessments actually work for students in Sierra Leone. That's at the design stage, at the initial stage. I'd also like to mention that there's a lot of background work and legwork that goes on at the stage of dissemination of all this evidence to ensure that it's responding to the policy questions that are most pressing on the minds of policymakers in Sierra Leone. It's no good developing all this evidence, posting it on a certain website, and then all of that gathering dust. I think it really needs to speak to what the key debates and policy questions on the minds of the public, the policymakers in Sierra Leone is. And then it has to be presented in a way that is as simple and as accessible as possible to all stakeholders. So not just MBSSE. We see MBSSE as a core stakeholder, but then there's also the TSC and the DDEs and our teachers and communities and parents. I think we have to ensure that all of them are coming together. So our approach really has been to ensure actors at every level are with us. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris and Suruvi, for that. So this last question is for Concern and IRC. Your research is ongoing, your research and programs are ongoing. What challenges have you had in engaging the ministry, and how are you navigating those challenges?
Julia, do you want to go first, or? It's Austin Kennan here from Concern Worldwide. Thanks to everyone, and thanks to Juliet and colleagues for organising this really exciting event. In terms of challenges, I mean, I think one of the things is, I would say there's an institutional challenge for us in Concern Worldwide in relation to the safe learning model, and that's internally. We've had to grow in effect and move beyond district level engagement to much higher national level engagement. And it's been a really positive engagement with the ministry. I think I have to say that at the outset. I mean, there are always challenges. I think one of the challenges is probably a time pressure. You know, there's often a pressure to have draft policies on the table, and that, you know, is perfectly understandable. The pressure comes from elsewhere, and you want something on the table and then to take it forward. Whereas the nature of our research is that it's a multi-annual research. We probably will get most of the results next year. We will have an evaluation this year and a learning event, and we will of course share those up. But I think that's really the thing. And I suppose something for ourselves is just to ensure, I think others have said this, but the ownership by the Ministry of Policy, and just to make sure that while we're trying to influence ministry, we're not also trying to take over. And I think what Dr. Kanu mentioned about the research application form and the Minister about the research unit, I think it's really exciting. It kind of shows how the ministry is going to really lead and manage the process. So let me stop there. I think there's that really is our experience.
Thanks, Austin. I can go next. Yeah, in terms of eager, I believe, like for everyone else, the onset of COVID-19 really impacted us, especially because our program with the girls only really started in January last year, and after a couple of months of learning sessions, we had to pause the activities in March, at the end of March, to adapt the program to COVID-19, and that has caused almost a 6 months delay in the implementation, which is also affecting the timeline of our research, which should have been completed last year, and now it's only going to be completed this year in terms of midline evaluation, which is when we will have some first data about the impact or the effectiveness of our interventions on our girls. So as activities resume, and they have resumed in September, thankfully, and they are continuing, and the project works towards a midterm evaluation, the program will be able to develop a wider dissemination strategy reflecting the change brought by COVID-19 and the evidence about the effectiveness of the state or learning model for out-of-school adolescent girls. So what we are hoping to be able to do this year, later this year, is to hold a presentation for key stakeholders within the government of Sierra Leone, and also in consultation with FCDO in country, so that we can align our findings from other programs that are implementing safe space programming for adolescent girls, as this will really be helpful in providing a larger body of evidence that can help and can inform policy dialogue and practice. And outside the COVID-19 response pillars and our bilateral engagement, I think the project recognized that the efforts made to elevate the findings and the lessons learned with the government was challenging, and I guess we are hoping for enhanced coordination with and better exposure of partners operating in programs supporting alternative provision of education to the most marginalized population, and particularly adolescent girls. So from our side, so far, we have been able to share our baseline research findings and also regular updates about our program adoptions and lessons learned with both the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs through bilateral, in-person and remote communication. We have also shared our curricula, both the functional literacy and numeracy curriculum with the ministry and the adapted life skill curriculum. At the district level, I think it's also important to mention this, that the project has constantly engaged with district education officers as well as representatives of Ministry of Social Welfare and Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs. So the project teams participated regularly in meetings, both prior COVID-19 and during the crisis, attending local response engagements. And this really helped in engaging district officials from the outset. So they were informed about the project plans, they were informed about the project adoptions and why we had adopted the program because of what we had learned through the research. So I think this was also really key. So I will stop there. I hope this is helpful.
Thank you, Julia and Austin, for addressing those. And we have a few questions in the chat now. I'll go to Colleen. You asked about how research today impacted or shifted the education service delivery in education in the most rural areas. From the ministry's perspective, we're, as mentioned already in a few of the presenters, we're working on our radical inclusion policy, which meets the needs in providing interventions and facilitating ways for those children in those rural areas to be reached and accommodated. And some of the researchers and presenters that have spoken are doing work in those areas. And we can ask specifically for those presenters to maybe give you further information on how their work is being impacted in those areas. And in the essence of time, we won't go into having each of them speak on it right now. But from the ministry's perspective, we're doing within our radical inclusion policy is to create interventions and reaching those children in those areas. The next question we'll go into is, I know someone asked about the research application that Dr. Yatta spoke about. We'll share the link with you once I locate it. We'll share it in the chat. But that application is up and can be completed on the website, and we're going to try to get it into PDF so you can download it, print it, and send it over. But we are open to discussions, and we're open to questions to explore ways in which you or your organization can conduct research. And I know there was another question that mentioned, it says for the MBSSE, this is from Richard, for the MBSSE and the Chief Education Officer, we do a lot of work on evidence for work that, for what works across a number of systems. How open is MBSSE to looking into a pilot evidence practice from other systems to the Sierra Leone context? And those, as I mentioned earlier, those are discussions that we can have after this webinar. My contact information will be shared. And so you can send me email and some of the questions, and we can arrange a meeting between myself and the CEO so we can discuss some of these practices that you've talked about. We have some other questions that are very specific to the organizations that have presented. And so I'll ensure that those questions get to them and coordinate not meetings, but facilitate ways for you to get those specific questions answered. And I know there's more questions about how research has benefited the most deprived and neglected schools in the most remote villages in Sierra Leone. I know within the research that were presented today, a lot of work has been done. I know Concern is doing a lot of work. I know IRC is doing a lot of work. So all of these partners are reaching out. And part of the reason for this webinar and this policy ebook is so researchers and organizations can look into some of the research that's being done and come on board with the MBSSE to say, we would like to address these areas and these focus. So we see that research is not being done, particularly in these areas. We would like to come and help in conducting this research. So the MBSSE is open to those conversations. All we ask is that in the spirit of partnership and collaboration that you work with us so we can give you the context in Sierra Leone and we can give you some of the background knowledge that you'll need to conduct your research. Let me see. And let me get the links for the application so that way those can be shared with you. But as you have witnessed, the production of this policy ebook would not have been possible without the commitment and efforts of the authors, research organizations, and government departments that participated in the project. The recommendations presented in each study draw upon credible evidence and the experiences of participation organization in supporting education in Sierra Leone. Each article in the policy ebook provides critical information and data on what is working and what could be further strengthened in the education system to improve education, access, quality, and equity. The Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, MBSSE, would like to thank all research partners for their support throughout the project, as well as colleagues at the Education Partnership Group who provided technical support and supported the MBSSE to draft, publish, and launch this ebook. As part of our ongoing commitment, all policy pursuits are guided by our 4 guiding principles, which includes universal access to quality, equitable education, radical inclusion, and comprehensive safety of all learners. The MBSSE, as you've heard in a few of the presenters, is currently working on the development of the following policy: radical inclusion, school feeding, early childhood education, early childhood development, school infrastructure planning and policy, and guidelines to help the use of school subsidy and school approval. All of the research and data gathered from these policies will enable the ministry to develop its overarching basic and senior secondary education policy, as Abdullah mentioned earlier. The ebook is now on the MBSSE website, and that link will be shared also in the chat under the resource tab under policy. We invite all stakeholders to see and read the work of colleagues and to reinforce old partnership and drive the need for new ones. We invite you to join the MBSSE in ensuring that all learners in Sierra Leone have equal opportunity to access quality, basic, technical, vocational, and higher education that enables them to participate in public life, contributing to the national and global economy, and fulfill their potential. Once again, thank you to the 6 contributing partners, EPG for supporting the development of this ebook, and the UK Aid for funding this project. And thank you for participating in this webinar. We look forward to your continued support of the ministry, and thank you. So I'll share those links now. And as I mentioned, each of the reports that are in the ebook, there's hyperlink to each of those individual reports and contact information for all the presenters that presented today. So thank you for, we will close this webinar. Okay. And the webinar recording will be shared also on the website. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, Juliet. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, see you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.